Hello and welcome to another episode of Sushi and the Swordfish. You're here with Sushi today, and I'm going to be looking at my January 2021 watched films. I'm going to be making a series of these for each month of 2021, as I actually spent quite a bit of time watching movies, and I've had this kind of project in my mind for a while. And I just went out there, grabbed a whole bunch of different movies each month to sit down and watch. And I'm just going through the tier list now and just seeing where they all would rank. And even though some of these movies were watched quite a while ago, I have a pretty good recollection of a lot of them. And I just think it's kind of something fun to do. Um, I think that there was a lot of great movies that I watched and some not so great ones. However, for all of these movies, some of them I do have some personal connection with, whether it was something I watched a lot when I was younger, as a child, or something that I just came across much later in life and just really enjoyed. And some of these I just found out about over on things like Rotten Tomatoes or through other YouTube channels, through friends who have made recommendations and so forth. So without further ado, we're going to quickly look at our tier list here. And all of these are actually inside jokes here with Swordfish. Each one is just to represent the sort of grade for the movies. At the top we have the top dog, which is a reference to a Chuck Norris film. Not exactly his finest hour. I know many people might not say that for most Chuck Norris movies. However, Top Dog was quite a bad film, but it is something that both Swordfish and I still routinely reference when we're talking about something that we really enjoy. So it is at the top of the list. Then we have Big Money, Big Prizes, and I Love It, which comes from the game Smash TV, and that would be the producer, announcer, I'm not too sure what his exact title is, but he makes this comment throughout the game. Then we have OK USA, which is a reference to the movie Bloodsport. For anyone who's seen that, it's a Jean-Claude Van Damme vehicle. It would be probably his first real successful movie, especially internationally. It's a martial arts film that at the time was quite unique. It kind of showcased what we see today to some degree in the MMA world. But this movie just got terrible acting. I've probably seen it somewhere upwards to 200 times. And I'm not even joking about that because it was on TV all the time. It was something that I ended up having a copy of as well. And just when there's nothing to do and you need a good laugh, you might watch Bloodsport. The fourth category, which is right near the bottom there, is Stink. And this comes from Conan the Barbarian. The character Subutai, who is, I believe, Arcanian, and becomes the loyal friend of Conan in the movie. He and Conan are breaking into a temple of the snake cult, who's led by Thulsa Doom, and I believe that was the High Priest Rexor that was conducting some nefarious business in this temple. Anyways, they break in, and without ruining sort of what happens during the scene, basically there's a bad smell coming out of where they're going to get these jewels and gold and so forth that they're supposed to be stealing. And Subutai just says, "Stink!" If you watch the movie, it makes a lot more sense why he's saying "stink." And finally, we have a reference to the arcade classic House of the Dead 2, and with its infamous voice acting, which was probably some of the worst you might ever hear. There's a guy that gets attacked by like a 5-headed serpent snake thing, I don't know, zombified snake thing, and as he's running, all he says is "no" when it grabs him. This game's got amazing voice acting, by the way. It's quite bad. So no is going to be our bottom of the barrel. These are some of the worst films you could possibly watch, just in my estimation and just my thoughts. So even though you might see a movie that's very well regarded, I might not have enjoyed it very much, and it might go in one of the lower categories, or might be a movie that many people say is terrible, and for whatever reason I might want to come back to it and really enjoy it, so it might go to the top. So let's jump right in. So first we're going to start with the first portion of the Dollars trilogy, and that is A Fistful of Dollars. And it's going right into our big money, big prizes, and I love it category. I really enjoyed this movie. Even though its blueprint is following another film, which we'll get to in the coming month, it's still done very well. And despite being shot for shot with that other film, it's very interesting to see the gunplay. And from what I recall, I don't believe Clint Eastwood was really a household name at this point. And even though he had done quite a bit of acting, he hadn't really been a huge breakout star, as far as I recall, at this time. And so he had gone to Italy and met the director Sergio Leone, and they made this first movie that became very successful and kicked off this whole spaghetti western genre, and that kind of ties into being done in Italy, despite being a sort of Wild West American setting. It's a really great film. The climax of the film is really cool and unexpected, and I'm sure at the time when this movie came out would have been quite surprising. And I just really enjoy this movie. I would recommend this one for sure if you enjoy westerns in any regard. The whole series of films are done really well, and it gets off to a great start with the first movie. Next we have Deadpool 2. This is a movie I didn't really know what to expect from it, so I had seen the first movie and enjoyed it quite a lot. Deadpool is a character that I've been a big fan of for a long time. I would say probably since the mid to late 90s, when the character had started in the early 90s. And it's kind of interesting how this character has exploded and really fits the sort of, I don't know if it's like the comedic sort of, lost the word that I want to explain it, but he just seems to fit the world of memes and those kind of jokes and quick one-off gags and things like that really well with the modern sensibilities of comedy, I suppose. But I'm going to put this under the OK USA. I think the first film's a little bit stronger. There's nothing wrong with this movie. It's very competent. It's got some really good jokes in it. Really good off play between Ryan Reynolds and Josh Brolin. They are, it's the straight man versus, the straight-laced guy and the goofy guy. So they're totally on opposite ends of the personality spectrum, and it plays really well in the film. And it's got some kind of fun little cameos here and there from other X-Men universe type characters and stuff too. All right, next we have For a Few Dollars More, which is the second film in the Dollars trilogy. And I really enjoyed this movie. I'm actually going to put it right into the top dog category. I just found the play between Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef to be really well done. Lee Van Cleef's character has a really cool story arc in this movie. He has a lot of reason to be doing the things he does in the film. Again, I don't want to necessarily ruin anything. At first, they're kind of at odds because they are sort of after the same thing, but they're not really after the same thing. Like Clint Eastwood's character is much more drift into town, make some money, and leave. But he's got that heart of gold, and that's what we see in The Fistful of Dollars, is that he's totally a drifter who walks in and just kind of rectifies the situation without necessarily meaning to initially, but realizing that this town really needs some sort of help. We get that a bit more For a Few Dollars More, but it's a little bit more, I feel it's a little bit more edgy. It's like push the things a little bit further into, it's not that he's a gray character, but he's certainly not, he's not totally a hero, but he's certainly not a villain either. So it's got a great dichotomy between especially those two leads, and the gunplay and stuff is really cool. There's just a lot of really nice scenes and shots of when the action is being portrayed. I like just the colors scheme of the film and the actual setting, like of the the homes that they're going through and kicking down doors and shooting guys and stuff. It's just done really well. I really, really enjoyed this movie. And it goes without saying, all three have an amazing soundtrack. I couldn't really necessarily decide which one has the best theme song. Many people will say that The Good, the Bad, the Ugly has the most iconic theme song. But I'm not sure it's my favorite of the three. I might go with A Few Dollars More as my favorite theme song as well, but it's pretty hard to choose between those three. Next we have Hobbs and Shaw, which is a spin-off of the Fast and Furious series. It's not a franchise I'm super familiar with. I've seen the first three films in full, parts of the fourth one, and then I just kind of stopped. I'd never seen any of the others. Crazy successful franchise, which is very, very odd to see a franchise basically die by the third film and suddenly sort of do a soft reboot and completely turn around its fortunes. And now it's a super successful franchise. It's so strange. I don't know if Hollywood has seen something like that happen very often. It's not only that becomes successful, like it's sequel after sequel after sequel, and they're all doing very well. So this film follows probably some of those sensibilities. It's going in the OK USA category. It's got some really fun, over-the-top action sequences, and they're really, really good playoffs between Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. It's a little bit jarring once Idris Elba comes on screen, and he's such a good actor, but there's not a great chemistry between those three. The two main leads do have really good chemistry, but once Idris Elba comes in, I don't know if it's just his acting approach and ability, it just doesn't quite mesh with them, and maybe because he's not really known as being as much of an action star as those two, so he's taken quite seriously, but he's doing a few goofy things, like he's got like enhanced abilities somehow. I don't know if it's like nanites in his blood or something like that. So it just seems a bit odd because he's such a good actor. But it's a fun movie for sure. All right, next we have so this movie's a bit of a weird one. It's a bit of a joke actually between Swordfish and I. I don't know how we came across this movie. I think we were just trying to find movies that had really bad scores on Rotten Tomatoes or something. I don't know, or maybe we saw it in a bargain bin somewheres. There's so many movies in bargain bins, and you see actors that maybe have had a heyday back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or what have you, and sometimes they're able to make comebacks, and sometimes they're not. This is a movie starring John Travolta. It is totally trying to be a ripoff of Taken, so with Liam Neeson, and it doesn't do it successfully. This movie goes right in the no category. It is really bad. Like it's shot poorly. It's not acted particularly well. The action sequences are also few and far between for a movie that's supposed to be kind of edgy and gritty and so forth. There's not a lot of action, and then when there is, there's a lot of quick cuts. There's even just sometimes no cuts. It'll just show you, oh, this looks like this big action sequence is coming up, and then it just cuts to the very next scene of dramatic acting, and you're like, okay, so where did this action sequence that's supposed to be it's just not there. So it's just a weird movie in a lot of regards. Not recommended whatsoever. You could find much better John Travolta movies. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard stuff like From Paris with Love is far better than I Am Wrath. And to this day, Swordfish and I still text each other and use this film as a bit of a punching bag, unfortunately. It's not recommended though. All right, next we have Rocky 3. I don't have too much to say about this. This is going in one of my top dog categories here because I really enjoy this movie. It's definitely borderline fantastical. The first two Rocky movies are far more grounded in a reality of what boxing might look like. What would it be like to be a boxer and not successful for most of your career, and then suddenly get a shot at being successful, And Rocky 3 just kind of flips all the way around. It's so lost the dramatic touch. There's almost no drama in this movie. I think there's pretty much one scene, two scenes, I guess, where there's any level of drama. And again, I won't ruin it, but there's a on the beach scene with Adrian that's pretty dramatic, and then Rocky loses a fight early on in the movie that's somewhat dramatic too. But there's so many elements of this that are just goofy, like from Thunderlips, which is played or who is played by Hulk Hogan, to Mr. T playing Clubber Lang, and he's so intense. And this is the movie where I Pity the Fool comes from. But it's such a fun movie. I really enjoy it. It's I have a hard time if I feel like this is my favorite Rocky movie or Rocky 4. I will say Rocky Balboa is also very good, but again, it goes far more in the dramatic. And I do like Rocky 2. I don't know. It's hard for me to, maybe on any given day I could switch around, but Rocky 3 is definitely one of my favorites, and I've seen it a lot of times too. Next, we have The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. A very critically acclaimed movie, wraps up the Dollars trilogy. For me, it just goes in the OK USA category. I thought it was good, and it was still very in line with the other two films, but it has this huge overarching element that kind of pulls away from what the other two movies did. They felt much more focused in the first two films to me, and the scale was smaller, whereas this one has such a much wider scale. There's like a Civil War element to it. I did watch an extended cut, so it certainly probably added pieces that might not have been in the original cut, or I assume were not in the original cut. And it feels like there's a lot more acting certainly going on in this movie. The first two films, there's certainly levels of acting, but it just feels as though the story's focus doesn't require that of the actors as much, whereas this movie, because so much is happening between these three characters when they're on screen together or even when they're not on screen together, it's such a much longer story to tell. And the opening sequence is really cool, where you get to see the three of them, and it comes up, for each of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and kind of gives you a really small snippet of their kind of, I wouldn't say their backstory, but just who they are. You get maybe about a 3 to 5 minute little short montage of their life at that point. And then it goes through the whole story, and then you get the super iconic cemetery scene, which is led in with the Ecstasy of Gold just before that, which is a very, very famous song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Probably the most famous song aside from the theme song. And it's just that scene is so well choreographed, shot, acted. Everything just comes together, from the wide shots to the shots of the actors' eyes to their hands twitching next to their guns, and it's such a cool scene. It's done so well. I mean, it's been parodied so many times because it's so well done. Still recommended to watch, especially if you see the other two. But it's not my favorite of the three, and it's interesting because you see most people, when they talk about the best Clint Eastwood movies, this is usually one of the ones at least that's recommended right away, whereas the other two don't quite get as much love, particularly for a few dollars more. It seems to just kind of get lost in that shuffle. You hear about the Dollars trilogy, but you don't really get as much attention to those other two compared to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. All right, we're moving into Wayne's World 2. I'm going to put this in the big money, big prizes, and I love it. I know, again, a lot of people might prefer Wayne's World 1, but I really enjoyed Wayne's World 2. We'll get to Wayne's World 1 down the line as well. I just happened to get a copy of Wayne's World 2 first. I like this movie, from Christopher Walken being so straight-laced in it, to Chris Farley and his just bumbling character that he plays with that. There's a point where he gets hit in the head with a tennis ball, and they say, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I've got no place to go." And he's basically begging to stay. There's just a lot of really funny jokes in this movie that just make me laugh still. That scene with Charlton Heston, and they kick out the other guy, and he looks so dejected as he's getting replaced in mid-movie and stuff. It's really done. I mean, there's some really funny fourth wall breaks and so forth in the film. I think it's worth watching if you like comedies and just want something fun to watch. And our second last here we have Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Again, another really unique movie that kind of helped usher in, I guess, or even close the end of the 80s. It's an interesting movie because it brought together a lot of iconic animated characters from the Disney universe to the Looney Tunes universe. You have characters like Betty Boop in there. You have Woody Woodpecker, Droopy Dog, and so forth and so forth. I don't recall there being Hanna-Barbera characters in this. Not that I can recall. But it does bring some of those like classic Hollywood animated characters to the big screen all in one movie, which at the time was super unheard of. And I'd heard that the sort of red tape that these companies went through and said, Mickey can't be on screen as long as Bugs Bunny, or Donald and Daffy, no, one can't upstage the other, and they have like a dueling piano scene in the movie. It must have been really hard for Bob Hoskins to act in this movie, since he was probably acting with nobody there a lot of the time, except for there was an actor who played Roger, from whom the title is named after, for Roger Rabbit. But it's such a neat movie, and it's set in the backdrop of, I think it's the 30s, so it's just got a really cool world around it, and you go from the human world into the Toontown and stuff. It's a neat movie. It's really neat. Robert Zemeckis has done a lot of really unique films. Is quite a famous director. This one is definitely one that I think people have forgotten, unfortunately, but is still worth revisiting. And finally, we have Wonder Woman. So before I go to move this, I have not been a big fan of the DC whatever universe, movie universe, whatever it's called. After seeing Man of Steel, I was immediately just turned away. I could not watch any of those follow-up films, whether that was that Batman v Superman or whatever that's called, the Justice League. Those, I just did not really enjoy the direction of that Man of Steel film enough that I just did not go into any of the others. I've heard some good things about the Aquaman film, but I just haven't bothered to watch that either. It's just something about the overall feel of those movies, just something doesn't sit right with me, and I'm not a huge comic book DC fan or anything. I did end up seeing like Green Lantern, which probably didn't help too, because that film did not come out very well either. Despite someone like Jeff Johns, was the writer of Green Lantern at the time and has put together some very interesting stories. However, this movie came out and I saw the trailer and I thought, okay, that might be worth giving a shot to. And I think the World War I theme really encouraged me to give this film a chance, because we don't get World War I sort of, I don't know, media a lot compared to the World War II media that's out there. We have so many movies that focus on World War II type themes and far less on World War I. Probably because World War I is quite hard to romanticize in some ways, as weird as that sounds, but World War I was just a dirty, gritty war, and nobody came out of that war really looking like heroes whatsoever. Not that World War II ended in necessarily on a great note for many peoples, but World War I just, I don't think it was such a long drawn out war that nobody expected to be a long drawn out war. Everyone thought, oh, we'll have a war for 6 months and it'll be over with. But it's conveyed really well in this movie. The actress, I'm probably going to mispronounce her name. I think it's Gal Gadot. She embodies Wonder Woman in this. Like, she has a great look as Wonder Woman. She's got the build. She has this really unique sense of some level of innocence because she's in a world she doesn't understand. but she's incredibly capable and strong. That running over the no man's land scene is super, super iconic. Looks so cool. Doesn't even skip a beat, right? And there's several other scenes in the movie where she has a vulnerability and a strength at the same time, and you believe in what she's doing. You believe that she's a real person but has those abilities. It's just done really well, and like her play off of is that Chris Pine is great. Like they have really good chemistry together. Like she and him have a really good on-screen presence in the movie, and feels very believable. So I really enjoyed this movie. So it's going to go in the big money, big prize, and I love it category. The end is a little bit, it gets a little CG heavy, no different than many other superhero movies, but very, very, very well done, and surprisingly so in some ways. It's got a levity to it where you're like, okay, this is a little bit dark. However, there's just enough sprinkled like hope and comedy, and there's a bit of a romance angle to it. It's really good. So I would recommend that one for sure. If that would be your jumping point into that film world, that comic book film world, that universe, it's a good jumping point for sure. Okay, well, thank you for joining me today. I'm going to wrap it up there. So I hope you will join me for the February look at those films as well. I know this was a little heavy on mostly action primarily, but I do start to delve into a lot of different genres in the coming months. That was kind of my goal for the year, is to watch a lot of movies that, even though there were some that I was super familiar with, but to look at some that I've never bothered to watch, whether they're considered classics or just different films from around the world and so forth. So I hope to see you down that road. Thanks and take care.